11 Americans, 4 states, 3 years. They all worked on something the U.S. government would rather keep quiet, and every single one of them is now missing or in the ground. And if you know where to look, a strangely similar list sits in a filing cabinet in London dated 40 years ago. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the InBetween. Between 2023 and the first months of 2026, at least 10 American scientists, researchers, and government officials have either vanished without a trace or turned up dead. 5 of them simply walked away from their homes on foot. 4 of them worked within the same defense corridors in New Mexico. 3 were connected to the same NASA laboratory in California. 2 were gunned down at their own front doors, and 1 was pulled from a frozen Massachusetts lake 3 months after he disappeared in the middle of the night. These cases were treated as isolated tragedies, unrelated. A missing hiker here, an unsolved shooting there. But when you put the names side by side, the institutions start overlapping. The timelines start compressing, and a picture begins to form that nobody in power seems willing to look at. Now, as usual, we did our best to dig a little deeper. We found a couple of things that add some more perspective to what is going on today. But first, I need to take you to a mountain trail in California, because this story, for me, starts with a hiker who should not have disappeared. On the morning of June 22nd, 2025, a 60-year-old woman named Monica Reza sets out to summit Mount Waterman in the Angeles National Forest with 2 friends. The trailhead sits along the Angeles Crest Highway. The terrain is steep, dry, and mountainous, but Monica knows these trails. By multiple accounts, she's hiked this area regularly, possibly weekly. She's fit, she's experienced, she is in her element. The group departs the 6,000-foot trailhead around 6:30 a.m. Early start, which is what you want to do in the San Gabriels. Get up, get to the summit, get off the mountain before the afternoon heat turns the trail into an oven. Now, the identities of the fellow hikers has never been released, so I don't know if they're male or female. So I'm just going to refer to them as Jane and John. Jane throws in the towel after less than 1.5 miles because the terrain is just too steep. Monica and the lead hiker, John, they reach the summit around 8:15. Pictures are taken, and they start heading back down. At about 9:01 a.m., a picture is taken of Monica near Double Delight Peak. A minute later, another picture, roughly 70 feet from the first. 6 minutes later, a third picture is taken, her last confirmed location, about a 1/4 mile from that second photo. Then they keep walking. John's about 30 feet ahead of Monica. He calls back up to let her know that a right turn is coming up on the ridge. Monica nods and waves at him. He makes the turn, descends about 150 feet. When he looks back, Monica is gone. He waits 5 minutes, and then goes back to where he'd last seen her. Nothing. He calls her name. He searches about 500 feet to the west along the ridge, and then 120 feet south. Nothing. No response, no sound, no sign of Monica Reza. Search and rescue from 6 counties respond. Helicopters with thermal imaging, forward-looking infrared cameras, dogs. They even run an algorithmic pixel matching program through their aerial photography equipment, calibrated specifically to pick up the red of Monica's shirt. The technology flags some targets, but every time searchers go check them out, all they find are mylar balloons caught in the brush. The next morning, a beanie belonging to Monica is found in a steep ravine south of the ridge, about 600 feet from where she was last seen. A 2 to 3 minute walk. Scent dogs are brought to the ravine, but can't pick up her trail. No entry point, no exit. She was not there. She'd never been there, as far as the dogs could tell. And yet, her beanie is. Later that afternoon, 2 hikers returning from Twin Peaks report hearing what sounded like a woman yelling around 2:30 p.m. But they also said it wasn't a cry for help or like somebody was in pain. It was more like somebody was crying out in anguish. The coordinates they give place the sound about 1,600 feet from Monica's last known position, under a third of a mile, a 5-minute walk. Some people said it could have been a coyote. But if it was Monica, why could she scream then but not respond to her name being called hours earlier? If you've ever listened to David Paulides talk about his missing 411 cases, this story has every hallmark. An experienced hiker in familiar terrain vanishes within minutes while just a few feet away from another person. Dogs lose the scent. The body's never found. The search reveals almost nothing. And the details don't add up in ways that feel intentional, as if the case was designed to resist explanation. But here's where Monica's case takes a hard left from the standard missing hiker story. Because Monica Reza was not just a woman who liked the mountains. She was a materials scientist and aerospace engineer who worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL. Before that, she spent decades at a company called Aerojet Rocketdyne, where she co-invented a nickel-based superalloy called Mondalloy in the 90s, with her name on the patent coming in 2010. The Mon in Mondalloy stands for Monica. This alloy can withstand extreme temperatures and pressures in oxygen-rich environments without cracking or igniting. And it solved a problem that the United States had been unable to solve for decades: how to build a rocket engine as powerful and efficient as the Russian RD-180 without having to buy it from Russia. For years, the U.S. depended on Russian-built engines to launch its spy satellites, military communication systems, and GPS infrastructure into orbit. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, that put a little bit of a kink in the US and Russia's aerospace bromance. Thankfully, somebody could see the writing on the wall and started scaling up design of new engines, some that included Mondalloy, before the final breakup that happened in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. And because the US government didn't have nice things to say about that little move, Russia took its toys and went home, cutting off all support for their engines, including spare parts, troubleshooting, and technical assistance. The RD-180 engines that powered our Atlas rockets were suddenly orphan technology. No more service, no more replacements, and Monica's superalloy became one of the most critical materials in the effort to build domestic alternatives. Multiple components in Aerojet Rocketdyne's AR-1 engine were made from Mondalloy. The Air Force funded it. NASA funded it. The alloy wasn't just for rocket engines either. Its ability to survive extreme conditions makes it applicable to hypersonic weapons, missile systems, and next-gen propulsion across the board. And the man who oversaw that funding at the Air Force Research Laboratory was a 2-star general named William Neal McCasland. But we'll talk about him in a minute, because Monica's disappearance was just the beginning. And the names that follow will show you that this is not a story about one missing hiker. It's a story about a pattern that stretches across 3 states, spans 3 years, and touches some of the most sensitive programs in the United States government. Around May 4th, 2025, roughly 7 weeks before Monica vanished, a 78-year-old man named Anthony Chavez is last seen at his home in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Anthony had retired from Los Alamos National Laboratory in 2017 after decades of work there. His specific role has never been disclosed, which, if you know anything about Los Alamos, tells you something all by itself. When family and authorities search his house, they find his wallet, his keys, and his personal belongings all sitting right where he'd left them. His car's locked in the driveway. No signs of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. Anthony Chavez simply is just gone. He has never been found. So, not even 2 months later is when Monica disappears. And 4 days after that, on June 26, 2025, 53-year-old Melissa Casillas vanishes. She worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory as an administrative employee, but she held a security clearance. Given the nature of what goes on behind those fences, administrative doesn't mean what it means at your local insurance office. That morning, Melissa drives her husband Mark to Los Alamos where they both work. Now, here's a detail that doesn't get enough attention. The story is that Melissa tells her husband she forgot her badge and would have to work from home that day. But to enter the parking lot at Los Alamos, you need your badge to get through the gate. She had it when she dropped him off. So what happened to it between the gate and the explanation? At some point during the day, Melissa picks up a sandwich and drops it off for her daughter in Taos. Then she vanishes. She is last seen walking eastbound along a state road near Tulpa in Taos County. When her family gets home, they find her car, her purse, her keys, and both of her cell phones, her personal one and the one for work. Both phones had been factory reset, wiped clean. Recent calls, messages, everything gone. Her family has pushed back hard against any suggestion that she left voluntarily. They've pointed out that she was actively planning to care for her mother during an upcoming surgery. Melissa Cassius is still missing. Stephen Garcia, 48 years old, government contractor employed at the Kansas City National Security Campus facility in Albuquerque, which manufactures over 80% of the non-nuclear components that go into building the U.S.'s nuclear weapons. And his company is directly downstream from Los Alamos. Basically, Los Alamos dreams it up, and Kansas City National Security builds it. His job gave him top secret clearance and oversight of assets worth tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars, some classified, some not. On August 28th, 2025, so just 2 months after Melissa goes missing, surveillance footage captures Stephen leaving his Albuquerque home on foot around 9 a.m. He's carrying a handgun. He left behind his phone, his wallet, his keys, and his car. Authorities initially said he might be a danger to himself, but an anonymous source close to the case pushed back, describing him as a very stable person. Stephen Garcia has not been seen since. That is 4 people, all connected to classified defense and nuclear programs, all vanishing from New Mexico within a span of about 4 months. And I need you to notice the pattern in how they all vanish, because it is almost identical in every case. They walk away on foot. They leave behind their phones, their wallets, their keys, their cars. No signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry, no ransom demands, no bodies. They just step out of their lives as though they were shedding a skin. And the devices that could track them, the phones that ping cell towers, the smartwatches that log GPS coordinates, every single one of those gets left behind. Every time. It's the kind of behavior that screams deliberate. But deliberate by whom? Did these people choose to vanish? Were they told to? Or did someone who understands counter surveillance strip them of everything traceable before making them disappear? I don't know, but keep pondering that while we head to Massachusetts. On the night of December 12th, 2025, a 45-year-old man named Jason Thomas left his home in Wakefield, Massachusetts. Jason was an associate director of chemical biology at Novartis, working on cancer treatments. He and his wife had just come home from dinner with friends, and everything seemed normal. They took care of the dogs, and Jason tells his wife he's going for a walk. He opens the front door and walks down the street into the darkness with his phone and his wallet still in the house. Surveillance footage captures him walking near train tracks shortly after midnight, and then he's gone. 3 months later, in March, after the ice thaws on Lake Quinnipiac, his body is recovered from the water. No cause of death has been publicly released. Authorities say no foul play is suspected, but they haven't explained how he ended up in that lake or why. 3 days after Jason Thomas vanished, on December 15th, 2025, a man named Nuno Loureiro is shot at the front door of his home in Brookline, Massachusetts, and dies the next day. Nuno was a Portuguese physicist and director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center. He held research contracts with the Department of Energy. The suspect in his killing, Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, shot up Brown University 2 days earlier, killing 2 people and injuring 9 more before hitting Nuno's front porch. Then deleted himself the next day inside a storage unit. So we will never know for sure why. Now, Nuno and Claudio were not strangers. They went to college together in Lisbon many years ago, and it is said that Claudio held a grudge against Brown University for being too easy and having bad cafeteria food, and against Nuno for him achieving the life that Claudio had always wanted but never got. Okay, seems a little out there, but those people certainly exist. Now, let's flip back to California. Carl Grillmer was a 67-year-old Caltech astrophysicist who had spent decades working on some of NASA's most important missions, including the Hubble and Spitzer space telescopes. In June of 2023, he was the lead researcher on a breakthrough that could help future space missions detect clear signs of life on other worlds, including Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus. He was part of the team that discovered water on distant exoplanets. But by this year, he was working on the NEO Surveyor, a next-generation space telescope designed to detect asteroids and comets that could impact Earth. He built the algorithms that find cold, dark objects against the even darker and colder background of space by detecting the faint heat they borrow from the sun. Carl lived in Llano, California, out in the Antelope Valley. Squirrel moment! While I was looking for Llano, I found Lake Los Angeles. Where's the lake?
I don't think it is what you think it is.
So Carl owns almost 40 acres in the middle of nowhere, probably so he could get a decent view of the night sky. The news sources say it's the 3700 block of 165th Street East. And considering that there are no other houses anywhere near that spot, it's pretty easy to pick out his house. On December 20th, 2025, Carl spots some random dude walking on his property with a rifle. Carl's wife says she thinks he's a little weird, but Carl just lets it go. But somebody else calls the cops, and the man is arrested. That man is 29-year-old Freddie Snyder. Freddie apparently lives a couple of miles away. There are only 2 real neighborhoods anywhere near Carl, and one would be too close to make that statement true, so we can pretty confidently narrow down about where Freddie is living. Freddie tells police he's headed to the post office and has the gun to ward off any animals. Seriously? The biggest problem with that statement is that the post office is in the other direction. Freddie spends 3 days in jail on weapons charges and is released on December 23rd on his own recognizance. Just 2 months later, on February 16th, 2026, Freddie allegedly pays Carl a visit and shoots Carl in the chest on the front porch of his house, where he dies before paramedics can arrive. Investigators say the two didn't know each other. No motive has been disclosed. There remain, in the words of the investigators, a lot of unknowns. And we still haven't gotten to the biggest name on the list. But first, there are 2 people I haven't talked about yet. And keep in mind that Caltech, the place where Carl worked, manages the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, for NASA. So these places are very connected. So first, a guy named Michael David Hicks, a research scientist at JPL who worked on the DART project, the mission where we literally crashed the spacecraft into an asteroid to test whether we could deflect one. He dies on July 30th, 2023, at the age of 59. And so far, no cause of death has been released. And Frank Maywald, a principal researcher and systems engineer at JPL, who worked on spaceflight instrumentation and remote sensing technologies, dies a year later on July 4th, 2024, at the age of 61. Again, no public cause of death, and reports indicate that no autopsy was ever done. 2 JPL scientists dead within a year of each other, no explanations. And then a third JPL scientist, Monica Reza, vanishes on a hiking trail 9 months after that. All three worked at the same place. Somehow, I don't think JPL is going to make Fortune magazine's best places to work list. Now let's talk about the last guy, and probably the biggest reason that any of this is in the news, William Neal McCasland. Bill is a retired United States Air Force Major General, 2 stars, with a master's and a PhD in astronautical engineering from MIT. This guy is no slouch. He was also the former director of special programs in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. That means if the project was black, he knew about it. Then he takes the job of commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where he oversaw a $7 billion portfolio of research into advanced materials, including Mondaloy, directed energy weapons, space systems, and classified programs that most members of Congress don't even know about. Wright-Patterson, by the way, is the same base that housed Project Blue Book for 22 years. The same base that the Air Force's own 1994 Roswell report described as a logical location for the study of unknown materials. So it makes perfect sense to have him there, since he knows all the secrets already anyway. And McCasland wasn't just a retired general playing shuffleboard. After leaving the military, he became director of technology at AeroVironment, defense contractors building sensors, space payloads, and laser systems for the Department of Defense. He founded a consulting firm that advised the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. He sat on the board of Riverside Research, a nonprofit with $450 million in active defense and intelligence contracts. He was still in the game, just as connected to the secrets as he'd always been. His name shows up in WikiLeaks in a batch of emails from John Podesta on a calendar invitation for a January 2016 meeting. The attendee list reads like a Fox Mulder slumber party. John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager and a longtime advocate for UFO disclosure. Tom DeLonge, co-founder of the 80s band Blink-182, who would later release authenticated Navy UAP footage through his own organization, the To the Stars Academy. Rob Weiss, the executive vice president and general manager of Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. They're the division within Lockheed Martin that makes all the fun stuff. And our friend, Major General McCasland. He confirmed the meeting time himself in a direct email exchange with Podesta. And in a separate message, DeLonge wrote that McCasland was in charge of the relevant laboratory and that when Roswell crashed, they shipped it to the laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now, that is a claim, not a confirmed fact, but it's a claim made in writing, naming a specific general, a specific base, and a specific event. On the morning of February 27th, 2026, 8 days after President Trump publicly directed the Pentagon to begin identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, Bill McCasland leaves his home in Albuquerque on foot while his wife is gone at a doctor's appointment. He leaves behind his cell phone, his prescription glasses, and his wearable devices, which I assume means like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit. He takes his wallet, his hiking boots, and a .38 caliber revolver with a leather holster. Now, let me back up here for just a second because there is another timeline going on that's kind of important. On February 19th, 2026, the President of the United States directs the Pentagon to release UFO files. February 24th, 5 days after that directive, the United States Navy formally denies a Freedom of Information Act appeal requesting the release of 78 UAP photographs. The Navy confirms all 78 photos exist, but they withhold every single one, citing classified national security information. Interesting. Why do I feel a fight brewing? And just as a little side coincidence, Around the same window, the operator of the Black Vault, which is the largest civilian archive of government UFO documents in existence, discovers that the site's main document server has been wiped. Millions of files gone. The hosting provider tells him it looks like a deletion, not corruption. But nobody can figure out who did it and how it was done. Thankfully, all the files are backed up, so the site is up and running in no time. But then comes Friday, February 27th, the day that Bill McCasland walks out of his house and vanishes. Investigators canvass more than 700 houses looking for security camera footage. Not a single camera captures him leaving the neighborhood. Now, I realize that not everyone has security cameras on their houses, but if you look at his neighborhood, I bet a good chunk of them do. But there are no confirmed sightings, so there's also no idea which way he went. His wife Susan tells the 911 operator something that has stuck with everyone who has heard it. She says it seems deliberate. She says he left his phone behind, which he never does. It's like he planned not to be found. Now, if that's the case, take a look at his neighborhood on the map and then zoom out. His backyard is essentially the Sandia mountain range. It's just a quick jaunt of just over a mile to get on trails leading into the mountains and away from everything and everyone. Just food for thought. The next day, the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office issues a silver alert, which is like an amber alert, except it's for seniors who have demonstrable and irreversible cognitive decline. But Susan says he doesn't have Alzheimer's, wasn't confused or disoriented. He'd completed a 60-mile bike ride the week before. A lot of news outlets are jumping on the idea that maybe that's not true. Maybe he is having some issues. And they point out that at some point, Bill is said to have mentioned of having brain fog. Who doesn't? I know I do on a daily basis. So we still have no idea why the sheriff's office decided to issue that silver alert. Investigative journalist Ross Coulthart has called McCasland's disappearance a grave national security crisis because that guy knows where all of the bodies in the UFO community are buried. So let me pull back and show you the web. Monica Reza invented a superalloy that the Air Force Research Laboratory under McCasland's command funded and developed for rocket engines. Melissa Cassius and Anthony Chavez both worked at Los Alamos. Stephen Garcia worked at the Kansas City National Security Campus with heavy ties to Los Alamos. Nuno Loureiro held Department of Energy contracts. Carl Gilmer worked at Caltech, which manages JPL, the same lab where Monica Reza, Michael Hicks, and Frank Maywald all worked. Jason Thomas worked at Novartis in the Boston Defense Corridor, steps from MIT, where McCasland earned his doctorate and where Nuno Loureiro ran the Fusion Center. These people didn't just work in the same general field. They worked in the same facilities, on the same programs, funded by the same agencies, during the same narrow window of time. But, believe it or not, this isn't the first time that a significant group of people working on significant defense-related programs have seemingly been targeted. Between 1982 and 1990, more than 20 scientists and engineers connected to GEC Marconi, a major UK defense contractor, died under circumstances that were, to put it mildly, hard to explain. These weren't ordinary deaths. And I need to walk you through some of them because the methods are so bizarre, so theatrically violent, that when you hear them in sequence, the word coincidence doesn't quite cover it. In March 1982, Dr. Keith Bowden, a senior computer scientist contracting for GEC Marconi, drove his car across a divided highway, off a bridge, and into an abandoned rail yard, coming home from a party in London. The authorities say Keith was driving drunk, but his wife and his attorney begged to differ. Friends said that he wasn't really drinking that much, and an investigator made a note that the tires on his car at the scene were not the same tires that had been on the car that morning. His pristine tires had been swapped out for worn ones. In August 1986, 24-year-old Vimal Dajabai, a computer scientist at Marconi Underwater Systems working on the Stingray torpedo control system, jumped 331 feet from Bristol's Clifton Suspension Bridge. He was found with his pants around his ankles and a needle-sized puncture wound on his butt that the coroner called unexplained. His case is still open. 2 months later, in October 1986, Arshad Sharif, a 26-year-old computer analyst at Marconi Defense Systems, ties a rope around his neck with the other end tied to a tree, gets into his car, and drives. Reports say that the day before, he'd been acting really weird, paying for things with unusually large denomination bills. That case is still open too, and the coroner actually called it out as being a lot like the last case. In January 1987, so just 3 months later, Richard Pugh, a 37-year-old computer consultant and digital communications expert, is found in his flat with his feet tied up, a plastic bag over his head, and thick rope wrapped around his body. Police rule his death as a sexual misadventure. Just 2 months later, in March of 1987, David Sands, 38, a senior scientist at a Marconi sister company, is driving along and makes a sudden high-speed U-turn into an empty restaurant. His car is packed with gas cans. The crash created a fireball so intense, David has to be identified by dental records. In August of 1988, Alistair Beckham is a 50-year-old software engineer at Plessey, another company that supplied advanced tech to the UK Ministry of Defence, so their scientists and engineers sometimes overlapped in projects. Alistair was working on what investigators believed were SDI pilot programs. That's the Star Wars program that Reagan talked about. Alistair is found in his garden shed with wires attached to his chest, plugged directly into a wall socket. The fuse had been bypassed, so the current wouldn't trip it. A handkerchief is stuffed in his mouth. His wife says there's no way he did this to himself of his own volition. The Ministry of Defense clears out all of his files from his house within hours. That same month, John Ferry, a 60-year-old Marconi marketing director, apparently electrocutes himself by jamming wires into his tooth fillings. And this is just a few of the cases in that cluster. Journalist Tony Collins documented 25 cases in his 1990 book, Open Verdict. Clive Jenkins, leader of the ASTMS Union, which is the Association of Scientific, Technical, and Managerial Staffs, called the death rate statistically incredible. Members of Parliament demanded an inquiry. The British government under Margaret Thatcher poo-pooed the whole thing, saying it was all just a big coincidence. Just a few people having personal issues with their high security clearance, high stress jobs. And before you decide to agree with her, just know that multiple victims had complained before their deaths about being assigned impossible or unscientific tasks. Some of them were planning to quit. Others had scheduled meetings with members of Parliament. And after their deaths, Ministry of Defense teams sometimes arrived to clear out their files before the families could even process what had happened. Now, finally, we need to talk about Amy. Amy Catherine Eskridge, 34 years old, Huntsville, Alabama. She died on June 11th, 2022, from what has been reported as a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Neither the police nor the medical examiners in Huntsville have publicly released any details of an investigation. No police report, no autopsy findings, no coroner's statement. Nothing. A young woman dies, and the public record is a black hole. Before her death, Amy was researching and attempting to develop anti-gravity technology. She graduated from the University of Alabama in Huntsville with a double major in chemistry and biology. She became an interdisciplinarian who mastered electrical engineering, physics, and genetic engineering. She co-founded the Institute for Exotic Science with her father, Richard Eskridge, a retired NASA engineer who specialized in plasma physics and fusion technology. Together, through their company, Holocron Engineering, they delivered presentations about gravity modification experiments and historical anti-gravity research, including references to alleged classified programs developing triangular anti-gravity craft. Now, Huntsville is not a random place for this kind of work. It's one of NASA's most important hubs. In Amy's words,
now, Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government national security technology and intelligence community technology and aerospace technology.
And it has a very specific history with gravity research that should raise eyebrows. A Chinese-American physicist named Ning Li worked at the University of Alabama in Huntsville on anti-gravity theories involving superconductors. She left in 1999 to start a company called AC Gravity, reportedly funded by the Department of Defense. After 2003, she essentially vanished from public life. She was later hit by a car on the university campus in 2014, suffering brain damage that led to Alzheimer's. She died in 2021. The timing of that hit and run occurring after years of deeply secretive DoD-funded work raised considerable suspicion. Amy Eskridge knew this history. She operated in the same research community, and she knew the risks. In 2020, Amy said she intended to present new foundational research on anti-gravity, but she needed authorization from NASA before doing so. And that authorization apparently never came. And then there are the things that she said on camera. In a 2020 podcast, the same podcast that the first clip came from, Amy explained that she specifically created the Institute for Exotic Science as a public-facing organization for one reason: protection through visibility.
If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, you, they will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news. That's why the Institute exists.
She also said the threats against her were escalating, that she needed to publish her research soon. And during a Q&A session at one of her earlier presentations, audience members revealed that other scientists working in the same field harbored fears of disappearing, not as a hypothetical, as a real concern. 2 years later, Amy was dead, and the Institute for Exotic Science shut down. Its website went dark. Her father, the retired NASA engineer, has not publicly spoken. And almost nobody in the mainstream press reported a thing about it until this week, when she was identified as the 11th case in this growing list. But actually, since she died in 2022, that actually makes her the first. The White House has now acknowledged that these cases are, in their words, worth looking into. President Trump told reporters he just left a meeting on the subject and called it pretty serious stuff. He said he hoped that it was random, but that they'd have answers within a week and a half, that some of these people were very important. Congressman Tim Burchett, who sits on the Oversight Committee, has been briefed by, in his words, just about every alphabet agency there is. When he was asked about those cases, he didn't mince words.
I just know there are no coincidences in this town.
He said the only thing tying these people together is that they worked on things dealing with outer space, nuclear secrets, or missiles. And then he said something that stopped the interviewer cold. He said he'd been briefed on something 2 weeks ago that would have set the country on fire if the public had heard it, that people would demand answers. And then he added, very deliberately,
and for the record, I'm not suicidal. and I don't take risks.
When a sitting member of Congress feels the need to publicly announce that he's not suicidal, pay attention. When he tells you that the people who know things are dying or disappearing, pay attention. When the White House says they're investigating and the president calls it pretty serious stuff, pay attention. Because someone is paying very close attention to the people who know America's deepest secrets. Whatever's happening to them, it isn't over. So, what is happening here? I don't have that answer. Nobody does, not yet. The FBI has been asked to investigate, and the White House says it'll look into it. Now, I certainly think there are cases to be made that a couple of these people on the list are coincidental. Take Jason Thomas. He was involved in cancer research. He had nothing to do with any state secrets. Of course, that doesn't change the fact that his disappearance and death make absolutely no sense. But I think in the end, his is a case for David Paulides, not the White House. The other one I think we can cross off the list is Carl Grillmeyer. I think his is a tragic case of Freddie Snyder having some unresolved anger issues and taking them out on Carl because he thought it was Carl that put him in jail in the first place. But then again, and I've said this before, you can enlist people to do some crazy things on your behalf if there are enough zeros after the dollar sign. This is all pure speculation on my part, but Freddie, who is supposedly married with kids, was living with his mom. Maybe money was tight and he got hired to do a job. Maybe that first trespassing incident was Freddie coming to do the job, not expecting to be seen, much less arrested. I don't know. We'll have to watch the trial as it unfolds. But I want you to think about something for a moment. In the mid-1980s, 20 plus defense scientists died in Britain under bizarre circumstances, all connected to the same programs, all during a period of intense Cold War secrecy. The government said it was nothing. No investigation was ever opened, and the story was eventually forgotten. 40 years later, the same pattern is popping up. Different country, different programs, same types of people, same types of work, same refusal by those in charge to ask the obvious questions. Maybe they're right. Maybe it is all coincidence. Maybe 25 dead British scientists in the 1980s was a coincidence. Maybe 10 missing or dead American scientists with classified clearances in the span of 2 years is also a coincidence. And maybe Amy Eskridge warning on camera that people in her field are being silenced and then turning up dead with no investigation on record is just another tragic coincidence. But I don't think you believe that. And I don't think I do either. I'll be watching this one very closely, and I'll bring you everything I find, because this story is still unfolding. People are still missing. Investigations are still, supposedly, active. And the files that the president told the Pentagon to release, they haven't been released, at least not yet. But keep in mind that if connections are found in these 11 cases, the root cause is more apt to be far more terrestrial. Some other bad actors in the world wanting to slow down the US's ability to develop new technologies. Wouldn't be the first time, and probably not the second or third. But what if it's not a terrestrial enemy? What if revelations about the universe and our part in it do come to light? Tim Burchett says he thinks we can handle it. Would the answer to Reagan's question in the 80s as to whether or not we as a whole planet species could come together to fight a common otherworldly threat be yes? Well, for better or for worse, we are not the same people we were in the 80s. And I'm not as sure about that answer as I used to be. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We may have a little more growing up to do before we take our seat in the Galactic Federation. We here at the In-Between sincerely pray that those that can be found will be, and that investigations uncover answers so that all of the families and friends of those involved can find some peace. I could be totally off base, but something tells me that this story is far from over. We will keep our eyes on it and update you if any new information comes to light. In the meantime, if you've had enough adulting for one day and you want to stay in your happy place for just a little longer, I'm with you. Just go ahead and click right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.